But it didn't start out like this, so let's get unboxing. Opening the box, you'll see the included unlubed screw and stabilisers, and accompanying wires both coming in plastic cases. The case itself comes wrapped in PE foam, with extras and instructions on top. A coiled cable is also included, which is pretty nice and appears to have gold plated connectors. Under all that we have the PCB, which is hot swap and 3 and 5 pin compatible. Right at the bottom is a switch and keycap puller plus screwdriver, which are nice extras if you're a beginner. But wait, what about any dampening? Don't panic. Opening up the case, inside we have the polycarbonate plate, silicone PCB dampener and a PCB dampening pad. With all budget keyboards, I like to test the PCB to see if everything works before modding. This is probably not advised, but I did use a pair of tweezers. It's just way quicker than plugging in all the switches. I applied a thin coating of Krytox 205 grade 0 to the stem and housing's main 2 points of contact, and added a coating of dielectric grease to the wires to help reduce any rattle. They do also come clipped, which is a nice extra. The included screws for mounting come in a blue bag and screw into the bottom of the stabilisers. As these are screw-in stabilisers, they will rattle much less than the standard cherry style that come with most budget boards, so should sound better too. Next I'm going to be fitting the pour-on gaskets. I started by sticking them to the top plate, but it was fiddly and I couldn't get them to line up straight. Looking at the case, it has dedicated slots to hold the gaskets, so sticking them to the case instead just worked much better, and several spares are included, which is a nice extra. Looking at the bottom of the case, you even need to assemble the feet. They come packed with rubber pads which need to be stuck on. Rubber pads for the case also need to be added. It turns out that the PCB dampening pad should have been placed down before the stabilisers were screwed in. I couldn't be bothered to remove them and do it the proper way, so I just cut the pad and slotted it under the stabiliser wires. On top of that comes the silicone dampening pad. And this little thing is a silicone spacebar dampener, which you can choose to add if you want. Holding all of that together is the polycarbonate plate. Flipping it over, we can see that there are, screw holes to hold this thing together, but the dampening pad doesn't have the holes cut out, so I just took some tweezers and made the holes myself. After screwing it together, the whole section is held together pretty firmly as one unit, which makes building the rest of the kit pretty simple. I'm going to tape mod the PCB, so it hopefully has more of a poppy sound. I put 4 layers of masking tape, and if you want to do the same, just make sure you use a tape which is not super sticky, or leaves a residue behind. That might damage the PCB. Basically, just don't use this stuff. I've tried to make the layers as even as possible to help give the same sound profile across the entire board, and cut a hole for the cable to connect. There really isn't that much of a gap inside the case that would cause any hollowness, but I'm going to add some foam anyway, just to help make this board as good as possible. I thought the included packaging would make for some good filler foam, but sadly it's just too thin and wouldn't really make any noticeable difference. Piggybacking off the original idea, I searched around and found this old packaging foam from a recent delivery. It's much thicker, so should work better at reducing sound. I cut the foam to size, and I think it should do a pretty decent job once the PCB is pushing against it, which should wedge it more securely. Even for this thin piece of foam, the top plate barely fits against the case, but once fully assembled, it should all fit together as the foam compresses. The only quality issues I've noticed so far are these small grey scratches and scuffs on the top plate, and a further small white plastic stress mark on the top section of the case. Although when assembled, none of these are going to be noticeable, and for the price, I'm more than happy to overlook a few little cosmetic marks. Now this keyboard does come with north-facing LEDs, which can potentially cause issues with cherry profile keycaps and certain switches, but if done right, it shouldn't be an issue. For the keycaps, I went with some GMK Jamon clones. The presentation wasn't the best, there was lots of hair and dust in amongst the keycaps, which was a little odd, but they did come in a box, which was nice, and the actual quality of the keycaps is pretty good, with no noticeable defects, and they only cost $24, which is pretty cheap. The only thing I've noticed with these keycaps is they don't seem to be moulded out of red plastic. Instead seem to just be red paint on white keycaps, but that shouldn't really be an issue apart from maybe durability. None of the symbols or letters are misaligned or distorted, which is pretty good for keycaps this cheap. For the switches on this build, I wanted to go with a personal favourite, the Akko Lavender purples. They are a light tactile and once lubed are just super satisfying to type on, and align with the budget aspect of this build. For lubing, I'm going to put a thin amount of Krytox 205 grade 0 down the stem and housing's main 2 points of contact, and as they're a tactile switch, I'm going to avoid lubing the legs. The screws for fixing the case together once again come in a small bag, and do have a couple of spares also included. The only issue I see here is that these metal screws just go right into the plastic case, so if you're going to be taking the case apart frequently, there's a chance you could strip the plastic thread. I'm super happy with how this build now looks. I think the red, black and white go really well together, and the lavender purple switches once lubed feel and sound really good. If RGB is your thing, this keyboard has some pretty decent software and there are plenty of customizable options with a whole range of colours. And it has options for static colours, which is pretty good for colour themed keyboards and is a feature that's sometimes overlooked by manufacturers. The software was quite difficult to find, so I'll leave a link for you guys down in the description. I've been having some weird issues when using tactile switches and this spacebar. As you can see, the spacebar gets stuck halfway up. Because of this, I've swapped out the switch to an Akko Rose Red, which fixed the problem, but it is a linear switch, so it does feel a little inconsistent. Okay, that's enough talking, let's hear the sound test. You might have thought that this was an on and off switch, but no, it actually seems to enable and disable the Windows key. Pretty useful if that's the only key you seem to be able to hit while gaming. If you like this build, then you might be interested in the previous build I did on the top left, or maybe my review of the Akko Lavender Purples.